The skin she left behind. A Jamaican Folklore Tale. Chapter 1. When the dogs refuse to bark. There are villages in Jamaica where the night is never truly silent. The tree frogs sing. The wind carries the scent of pimento and wet earth. Banana leaves whisper secrets to one another. And somewhere beyond the last flickering porch light, the darkness waits. Not every shadow is empty. Not every sound belongs to the living. In the hills of St. Mary stood the village of Harmony Gap, a place where every neighbor knew every family, every child answered to every elder, and every story carried a warning. Children were never allowed outside after sunset. Not because of thieves. Not because of wild animals. But because, according to the old people, some things only wake after dark. Nobody laughed when Miss Euphemia spoke those words. She had buried a husband, raised 7 children, delivered half the babies in the district, and at 93 years old, she still locked every window before the sun disappeared behind the blue mountains. People thought it was habit. Only a handful knew it was fear. The strange events began on a Tuesday. The dogs stopped barking. Not just one dog. Every dog. Normally, the village echoed with barking whenever strangers passed. That night, nothing. Even the mongrels that chased every motorcycle tucked their tails beneath the verandas. The silence spread from house to house like fog. Then came the dreams. Children woke screaming about a woman without skin. Mothers found strange scratches on bedroom windows. A rooster disappeared without leaving a single feather behind. By the week's end, nobody was sleeping well. The elders refused to talk. Instead, they began hanging broomsticks behind every door. Rice was scattered across thresholds. Open Bibles rested beneath pillows. No one explained why. Everyone simply understood. Something old had returned. 14-year-old Daniel Brown believed none of it. Ghost stories were for tourists and little children. He had grown up hearing tales of duppies, rolling calf, river mama, and Old Higue. His grandfather always ended the stories the same way. Believe them or don't. The night doesn't care. Daniel always laughed. Until the night he saw someone climbing out of her own skin. Not taking off a jacket. Not removing clothes. Her skin. Slowly. Carefully. Like someone stepping out of a costume. Beneath it stood a thin, pale creature with burning eyes. It folded its empty skin neatly beneath a silk cotton tree, spread impossibly wide wings, and vanished into the moonlit sky. Daniel forgot how to breathe. Every story he had ever mocked suddenly became terrifyingly real. And before dawn arrived, the creature came back. But it wasn't alone. Something was following it. Chapter 2. Miss Euphemia's Warning. Morning arrived gently over Harmony Gap. The first rays of sunlight spilled across the blue mountains, painting the hills in gold while mist clung stubbornly to the valleys below. Roosters announced the day with unwavering confidence. Goats wandered toward fresh grass, and the smell of roasting breadfruit drifted from small kitchens where breakfast had already begun. To anyone passing through, it looked like an ordinary Jamaican morning. But Harmony Gap had not slept. Curtains twitched as neighbors watched one another from behind windows. Conversations were quieter than usual. Even laughter seemed reluctant to leave anyone's lips. People were waiting for someone else to speak first. Daniel Brown had not told a soul what he had seen beneath the silk cotton tree. Every time he closed his eyes, the image returned. The woman, standing beneath the moonlight. Her hands reaching for the edge of her own face. The slow peeling of skin from flesh that should never have been exposed. The folded skin resting neatly against the roots of the ancient tree. and those impossible wings disappearing into the darkness. He had spent the remainder of the night staring at the ceiling, wondering whether fear could create memories that felt so real. By sunrise, he knew it had not been a dream. His shoes still carried red dirt from the path. Miss Euphemia's yard sat on the highest hill in the district. Children often joked that if heaven had a front porch, it probably looked like hers. A crooked zinc roof shaded a wide veranda where rocking chairs faced the valley. Old flower pots overflowed with aloe, fever grass, and mint. Bundles of drying herbs hung beneath the eaves. Daniel found the old woman sweeping her yard. She was 93 years old. Her back curved with age, but every stroke of the broom was deliberate. Without turning around, she spoke. "You stayed out too late." Daniel froze. I didn't tell anybody." "You didn't have to." She finally faced him. Her cloudy eyes settled on his face. "What you see last night?" Daniel swallowed. "A woman." He paused. "No." His voice trembled. It wasn't a woman anymore. Miss Euphemia nodded once. "As me expect." She leaned her broom against the wall and motioned for him to sit. For several long moments, neither of them spoke. The breeze carried the scent of ripe mangoes. Somewhere in the distance, a wood dove called. Finally, she broke the silence. "My grandmother told me one thing when me was smaller than you." Her voice softened. "Don't fear every monster you hear about." Daniel frowned. "I thought you were going to say I should fear all of them." She shook her head. "No, the dangerous ones." She looked toward the hills beyond the village. "We're people first." The words settled over the veranda like gathering rain. Daniel waited. The Old Higue wasn't born flying. She wasn't born cursed. Once, she laughed. She loved. She held babies in her arms. She walked these same hills in daylight just like anybody else. Daniel stared at her. What happened to her? Miss Euphemia's expression darkened. Some stories begin with evil. This one began with grief. Before Daniel could ask another question, the old woman rose from her chair and disappeared inside the house. When she returned, she carried a small cloth bundle tied with faded blue string. Inside were coarse sea salt, a tiny Bible worn smooth by decades of use, and a sprig of dried guinea hen weed. She placed them gently into Daniel's hands. "Keep these close. You really believe they'll protect me?" Miss Euphemia smiled sadly. "They're not for protection. They're to remind you." "Remind me of what?" "That courage isn't pretending monsters don't exist. It's choosing not to become one." Daniel looked down at the bundle. When he looked back up, Miss Euphemia was no longer looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on the road beyond the gate. A woman in a bright yellow dress walked slowly past the house. She smiled. She waved politely. Every neighbor waved back. Everyone. Except Miss Euphemia. The old woman's fingers tightened around the handle of her broom until her knuckles turned white. In a whisper barely louder than the wind, she said. She came back. Daniel turned to ask who she meant. But the woman in yellow had already disappeared around the bend. Only the silence remained. Chapter 3. The Woman in the Yellow Dress. There are some people a village notices the moment they arrive. Then there are others, who somehow seem as though they have always belonged. By the end of that week, everyone in Harmony Gap spoke warmly of the woman in the yellow dress. She introduced herself simply as Miss Celia Morgan. She said she had inherited her late aunt's little cottage on the eastern edge of the district. No one remembered an aunt. No one remembered the cottage belonging to her family. Yet somehow, nobody questioned it. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who understood country life. She greeted every passerby with a warm smile. She stopped to admire children's drawings. She bought ripe bananas from roadside vendors without bargaining over the price. By Sunday, half the village was convinced she was one of the kindest women they had ever met. Daniel couldn't explain why, but every time she smiled, something inside him tightened. Not fear, recognition. As though his mind remembered something his heart wished to forget. Miss Celia attended church that Sunday. The little white chapel overflowed with voices as hymns drifted through open windows into the morning breeze. Pastor Henry welcomed her from the pulpit. "Visitors are blessings," he said with a broad smile. The congregation answered with cheerful amens. Miss Celia bowed her head politely. She sang every hymn. She listened quietly to the sermon. She laughed with the women after service as they packed slices of bun and cheese onto paper plates. Nothing about her seemed unusual. Except, every photograph taken that morning came out slightly blurred where she stood. The church secretary blamed the old camera. No one thought much of it. No one. Except Daniel. Late that afternoon, he wandered toward the village shop. The old grocery was little more than weathered boards, a humming drinks cooler, and shelves lined with flour, sardines, condensed milk, and tins of mackerel. Mr. Sinclair leaned against the doorway, fanning himself with yesterday's newspaper. "You look tired, boy." Daniel forced a smile. "Didn't sleep much. Storm coming." Daniel looked toward the blue sky. "There isn't a cloud." Mr. Sinclair chuckled. "Not every storm lives in the sky." As Daniel stepped outside, he almost collided with Miss Celia. "Oh, excuse me." Her voice was gentle, almost musical. She studied the basket in her hands. Fresh callaloo, Scotch bonnet peppers, Irish potatoes, a loaf of hard dough bread. Ordinary things. Yet as Daniel apologized, his eyes drifted downward. Her feet were spotless. The road outside the shop had turned muddy after rain the evening before. Everyone's shoes carried brown clay. Everyone's. Except hers. Not a grain of dirt. Not even around the edges of her sandals. She noticed him staring. Something wrong. Daniel looked away. "No, Mississippi." She smiled again. "I hope we'll be friends." Then she walked slowly down the road. Daniel watched every step. Still. Not a footprint remained behind her. That evening he climbed the hill to Miss Euphemia's veranda. She was already waiting. "You see her again?" It wasn't a question. Daniel nodded. "Everybody likes her." They would. "She doesn't leave footprints." The old woman closed her eyes. "And?" "Her shoes stay clean." Miss Euphemia sighed deeply. "Anything else?" Daniel hesitated. "I don't think she blinked." Silence settled over the veranda. The old woman reached for the enamel cup beside her chair but stopped before lifting it. "When I was a little girl, my grandmother used to say, the greatest trick darkness ever learned was wearing a friendly face." The breeze died. Even the bamboo behind the house stopped rustling. Then, from somewhere deep in the valley, a baby began crying. One child, then another, then another. The cries rose one after another until they echoed across Harmony Gap like a mournful chorus. Miss Euphemia stood so quickly that her rocking chair tipped backward. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "She's hunting tonight." Daniel felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. Across the valley, just beyond the last house, a single figure in a yellow dress stood perfectly still beside the ancient silk cotton tree, watching the village. Watching him. Village. Chapter 4. The Silk Cotton Tree. Some trees grow from the earth. Others seem to grow from memory. Long before Harmony Gap had a church. Before there was a school. Before anyone had carved a road through the hills. The silk cotton tree already stood. Its trunk was so wide that 6 grown men holding hands could barely surround it. Its roots rose from the earth like the backs of sleeping giants, twisting across the hillside before disappearing into the soil again. Children were told never to climb it. Hunters refused to rest beneath it. Woodcutters would rather walk another mile than swing an axe in its direction. If you asked why, most adults simply answered, because some things deserve respect. The oldest people gave a different answer. They're not alone. Daniel had heard the stories all his life. He had laughed at them. Today, he followed the narrow footpath back to the tree. The afternoon sun filtered through layers of broad green leaves, scattering patches of light across the forest floor. Every step seemed louder than it should have been. Dry leaves cracked beneath his shoes. The buzzing of insects faded. The birds stopped singing. He noticed it only after the silence had settled around him. Even the breeze had vanished. The forest had become strangely still. It was as though the hill itself were listening. When the tree finally appeared between the ferns, Daniel stopped. It looked even larger in daylight. The bark was scarred by centuries. Deep grooves disappeared into darkness. Roots curled over the hillside like ancient stone walls. The air felt cooler here. Not pleasantly cool. Different. Older. He stepped closer. Then he saw it. At the base of one enormous root lay something caught beneath fallen leaves. A strip of faded yellow fabric. The same shade as Miss Celia's dress. Daniel knelt carefully. The cloth was soft. Far softer than it should have been after lying in the dirt. As he reached for it, a voice spoke behind him. Leave it. Daniel spun around so quickly he nearly fell. An old man stood only a few feet away. Daniel had heard no footsteps. No rustling leaves. Nothing. The stranger carried a worn walking stick carved from lignum vitae. His straw hat shaded a weathered face that looked as old as the hills themselves. His beard was silver. His eyes were clear enough to frighten anyone who believed age weakened a person. You don't pick up what the tree keeps, the old man said quietly. Daniel swallowed. I didn't know anyone was here. I've been here longer than you. The answer carried no anger, only certainty. The old man walked toward the tree. He placed one rough hand against its trunk. For a long moment, he closed his eyes, almost as though greeting an old friend. My father taught me to watch this place. His father taught him. And before that, he smiled faintly. Well, some duties are older than names. Daniel looked again at the yellow cloth. What is it? The old man's face hardened. Evidence. Of what? That she was here before sunrise. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. You know about her? The stranger looked directly at him. I know enough to still be alive. He crouched beside one of the great roots. Tell me, Daniel. The boy blinked. You know my name? Small village. The old man shrugged. Everybody knows everybody. It sounded reasonable. Yet something about the answer felt incomplete. What did you see that night? Daniel described everything. The woman. The skin. The wings. The flight into the darkness. The old man listened without interruption. When Daniel finished, he nodded slowly. You saw the truth. Daniel expected relief. Instead, the old man's expression became troubled. Truth is expensive. What do you mean? Now that you've seen her. He looked toward the forest. She knows you've seen her. A sudden gust swept through the clearing. Leaves spiraled into the air. Somewhere above them, something moved. Not a bird. Too large. A dark shape crossed silently from one branch to another. Daniel looked up. Nothing. Only leaves. Only shadows. Only sky. The old man had already begun walking away. Come. Where are we going? To show you something. They followed a narrow trail behind the silk cotton tree, one almost completely hidden by vines. After several minutes, they reached a small stone circle buried beneath moss. There were no names carved into the stones. No dates. Only simple crosses weathered by time. Daniel counted them. 1, 2, 3. 7. 7 graves. Who's buried here? He whispered. The old man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the towering silk cotton tree swaying gently above them. Finally, he spoke. No one. Daniel frowned. But there are graves. The old man's voice dropped to almost a whisper. They're not graves, son. They're markers. Markers for the people who were never found. At that very moment, a woman's laughter floated through the trees. Soft, warm, almost inviting. Daniel turned toward the sound. There, between 2 tall bamboo clumps, stood Miss Celia in her yellow dress. She smiled, raised one hand in a friendly wave. Then, without making a single sound, she disappeared into the forest. The old man's face lost all color. We're too late. He tightened his grip on the walking stick. Tonight, she won't be hunting alone. Chapter 5. The Cry Above the Hills. There is a sound known only to those who have lived long enough in the Jamaican countryside. It is not the call of a doctor bird, not the whistle of the blackbird, not the mournful cry of the wood dove drifting through the hills at dusk. It is something else. A sound that arrives without warning. A sound so unfamiliar that the mind struggles to decide whether it belongs to a bird or to someone trying very hard to sound like one. The old people never looked for its source. They simply went inside. By sunset, Harmony Gap had changed. Windows that usually stood open were shut tight. Oil lamps were lit earlier than usual. Children who normally chased one another through dusty lanes had disappeared indoors before darkness settled across the valley. Even the domino game outside Mr. Sinclair's shop ended before anyone reached 21. No one announced it. Everyone simply knew. Tonight, the village would not stay awake. Daniel sat on the veranda with his grandfather. Neither of them spoke. The old man slowly sharpened his cutlass with a smooth river stone, drawing the blade across it with long, patient strokes. Shoo! 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 The steady rhythm somehow made the silence even heavier. Finally, Daniel asked, Grandpa, have you ever seen an Old Higue? The sharpening stopped. His grandfather stared into the fading light. When I was your age. My father asked me the same question. And what did your grandfather say? The old man smiled faintly. He told me, never ask questions if you aren't prepared to hear answers. Daniel waited. So? His grandfather rested the cutlass across his knees. I never saw her. He paused. But I saw what she left behind. Darkness settled quickly. The moon remained hidden behind thick clouds. Not a single star pierced the sky. Then, it came. A cry, high above the village. Long, thin, almost human. It drifted across the hills like a blade sliding through silk. Every dog in Harmony Gap tucked its tail beneath the nearest step. The goats crowded together inside their pens. Even the crickets stopped singing. Again, the cry echoed. Closer this time. Daniel instinctively looked toward the sky. His grandfather reached over and gently lowered the boy's chin. Don't. Why? Because some things want you to look. Across the valley, Miss Euphemia stood in her doorway with a lantern in one hand and her Bible in the other. She whispered a prayer older than memory. Not because she believed words alone could stop evil, But because faith gave courage when fear demanded surrender, the flame inside the lantern flickered. Once, twice, then stretched sideways, though there was no wind. Miss Euphemia frowned. They're moving. Far above the silk cotton tree. Something circled. Daniel could not see it. Only the shadow passing across the clouds. Round and round the village it flew. Once, twice, 3 times. Then, silence. Complete silence. The kind that presses against the ears until breathing sounds too loud. Daniel realized he had been holding his breath. His grandfather had stopped sharpening the cutlass. Both of them listened. Waiting. Nothing. Not a leaf moved. Not a branch creaked. It was as if Harmony Gap itself had vanished from the world. Then came the knock. 3 slow taps against the front door. Talk. 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 Daniel stared. His grandfather did not move. Another 3 knocks. Exactly the same. No voice followed. No greeting. Only silence. Daniel whispered, "Who's there?" His grandfather answered before anyone outside could. "No one you should answer." The knocking came again. A little louder. Talk. 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 The old man leaned close enough that only Daniel could hear him. "Whatever happens, do not open that door." Daniel nodded. The knocking stopped. For several heartbeats, there was nothing. Then, from the back of the house, a woman's voice floated through the kitchen window. Soft. Sweet. Familiar. Daniel. His heart lurched. It sounded exactly like his mother. She was supposed to be working the night shift at the clinic miles away. "Daniel, open the back door. I forgot something." His grandfather's eyes widened. Without raising his voice, he said, "That is not your mother." The voice came again. Closer now. Almost against the window. "My son." "I know you're inside." Daniel felt every hair on his arms stand upright. Because beneath the warmth in that voice, beneath the perfect imitation, he heard something else. A faint scraping, like fingernails, dragging slowly across glass. Chapter 6. The voice at the window. There are sounds that belong to the night. The chirping of crickets. The rustle of dry cane beneath a passing breeze. The distant bark of a lonely dog. And then, there are voices. Voices that know your name. Voices that borrow the sound of someone you love. The old people of Jamaica had a rule for such moments. If someone calls your name after midnight, wait. If they call again, pray. If they call a 3rd time, do not answer. Because whatever stands outside already knows who you are. The scraping continued. Slow, patient, almost polite. Daniel could hear each fingernail gliding across the kitchen window pane. His grandfather never took his eyes off the darkness beyond the door. He reached beneath his chair and lifted an old brown leather satchel. Its buckles had cracked with age. Its corners were worn smooth by decades of use. Inside were ordinary things. A small Bible. A cloth bag filled with coarse sea salt. A bundle of dried guinea hen weed. A short length of red thread. And an old bottle containing water so clear it almost looked like glass. Daniel frowned. That's all. His grandfather smiled without humor. The strongest things usually look ordinary. The voice returned. Daniel, you know it's me. The boy instinctively stepped toward the kitchen. His grandfather caught his wrist. The old man's grip was surprisingly strong. Listen. Daniel held his breath. This time, between the words, he heard another sound. A faint clicking, almost like teeth. Too many teeth. His stomach tightened. "It isn't breathing," he whispered. His grandfather nodded once. "Now you're hearing with your spirit." Outside, the figure tilted its head. It stood perfectly still beneath the mango tree. The moon slipped free of the clouds for just a moment. Its pale light touched the figure's face. It was Daniel's mother. Every detail was perfect. The familiar blue nurse's uniform. The silver earrings she wore every Sunday. Even the scar above her left eyebrow from falling off her bicycle years ago. Only one thing was wrong. She wasn't blinking. Not once. Not even as the wind stirred dust into her face. Across the village, the same game was unfolding. At Miss Ivy's house, a husband heard his late wife calling from the yard. At Mr. Sinclair's shop, someone knocked softly and asked for bread. At the church, Pastor Henry heard his younger brother singing a hymn. His brother had been buried 15 years earlier. Harmony Gap was being tested. Not with claws. Not with fire. But with memory. Back inside Daniel's house, the voice became softer. Almost pleading. "My son. I'm cold. Please. Just unlock the window." A tear rolled down Daniel's cheek before he realized it. For one dangerous heartbeat, he wanted to believe. His grandfather gently placed the little Bible into his hands. "Read." "I can't." "Read anyway." Daniel's voice trembled as he spoke the familiar words. The room seemed to grow warmer. Outside, the figure stopped smiling. Its head turned slowly. Farther. Farther. Until it had twisted far beyond what any human neck should allow. The eyes no longer looked like his mother's. They reflected the moon like those of a hunting animal. The pleasant voice vanished. In its place came a low, guttural hiss. The skin around the face rippled, as if something beneath it was trying to get out. Then, from somewhere high above the house, a terrible scream split the night. Not human. Not bird. Something ancient. The creature outside looked upward. For the first time, fear crossed its face. Real fear. Without another sound, it stepped backward into the darkness. One step, then another. And suddenly, it was gone. The night fell silent once more. Daniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His grandfather remained motionless. "No," he said quietly. "Don't relax yet." Daniel looked toward him. What scared her? The old man stared through the window toward the hills where the ancient silk cotton tree stood silhouetted against the moonlight. His voice was almost lost in the wind. That wasn't meant for her. Before Daniel could ask another question, 3 distant lanterns appeared on the hillside. They moved slowly through the darkness. Not wandering. Searching. And whoever carried them was coming straight toward Harmony Gap. Chapter 7. The Lantern Keepers. Not every battle against darkness is fought with weapons. Some are fought with memory. Some with faith. And some with people willing to walk toward the things everyone else is running from. The 3 lanterns continued their slow climb toward Harmony Gap. They never hurried. They never stopped. Each flame burned with the same steady golden light, untouched by the restless wind sweeping across the hills. Daniel stood on the veranda beside his grandfather. "Who are they?" His grandfather answered almost reverently. "The Lantern Keepers." "I've never heard of them." "You weren't supposed to." Long before there were police stations in these hills. Before electricity reached the countryside. Before paved roads connected one district to another. There were men and women whose only duty was to answer the unexplainable. When livestock vanished without tracks. When children disappeared from locked houses. When entire families abandoned farms overnight. The Lantern Keepers came. They asked few questions. Accepted no payment. stayed only until the danger had passed. Then they disappeared before sunrise, leaving behind nothing except stories. The first lantern reached the gate. Its bearer was an elderly woman wrapped in a plain white cotton dress. Her silver hair was braided neatly beneath a straw hat. Deep lines crossed her face, but her eyes were bright and unwavering. Behind her walked a tall man with shoulders as broad as a breadfruit tree trunk. Across his back rested an old mahogany staff polished smooth by decades of use. The third traveler was younger, perhaps 40, quiet, observant. He carried no weapon Daniel could see, only the lantern. The elderly woman smiled gently. "We're expected." Daniel frowned. "How did you know where to come?" She looked toward the hills. "We didn't. The hill called us." His grandfather opened the gate without hesitation. I was beginning to wonder if anybody still remembered. The woman laughed softly. "We remember. We always remember." She stepped onto the veranda and removed her hat. "My name is Sister Agnes." She nodded toward the broad-shouldered man. "This is Brother Elijah." Finally, she motioned toward the quiet traveler. "And that's Samuel." Samuel inclined his head but said nothing. His eyes had already begun scanning the darkness beyond the yard. Watching, listening, waiting. Inside the house, the four elders gathered around the wooden dining table. Daniel remained near the doorway. No one asked him to leave. No one seemed surprised that he stayed. Brother Elijah unrolled an old map across the table. It wasn't a map of roads. It marked rivers, ancient caves, silk cotton trees, old maroon trails, and places Daniel had never heard named before. Harmony Gap sat at the center. Brother Elijah tapped the paper. 3 nights ago. The boundary was broken. Sister Agnes nodded. "We felt it in Portland." Samuel finally spoke. His voice was calm. St. Thomas reported the same thing. Daniel looked from one face to another. "What boundary?" No one answered immediately. Finally, his grandfather sighed. "The one that keeps their world." He looked toward the window. "From becoming ours." The room grew still. Rain began tapping softly against the zinc roof. Daniel noticed something strange. Each lantern had been placed beside a different doorway. Front, back, kitchen, together. Their light formed a perfect triangle around the house. Sister Agnes caught him staring. "Light isn't only for seeing." She smiled kindly. "Sometimes. It reminds darkness where it cannot stand." Just after midnight, Samuel suddenly lifted one hand. Everyone fell silent. "What is it?" Daniel whispered. Samuel didn't answer. He walked slowly to the front window. Outside, the road was empty. The rain had stopped. The clouds drifted apart, revealing a full moon. Then, footprints began appearing in the mud, one after another, as though someone invisible were walking toward the house. Step, step, step. Each footprint filled slowly with rainwater. Yet no person could be seen. Daniel counted them. They stopped at the veranda steps. Silence. No knock. No voice. Nothing. Then one final footprint appeared. Not facing the house. Facing away. As if whoever had come had suddenly decided to leave. Samuel exhaled quietly. "She knows." Daniel's grandfather looked up sharply. "Knows what?" Samuel turned from the window. "She knows the lantern keepers are here." Brother Elijah tightened his grip on the mahogany staff. Sister Agnes closed her eyes for a brief prayer. Then Samuel spoke the words no one wanted to hear. "She isn't running anymore. She's gathering." The room fell silent, because everyone at that table understood what Daniel did not. And Old Higue almost always hunted alone. If she was gathering others, Harmony Gap was about to face something no one still living had ever witnessed. Chapter 8. The Gathering. There is an old saying in the hills of Jamaica. One duppy can frighten a man. Two can empty a house. But when the night itself begins to gather, leave the road to those who belong to it. Sleep never came to Harmony Gap. The lanterns burned until dawn. No one in Daniel's house dared extinguish them. Not because they believed the flames possessed magic, but because darkness had a way of growing bolder when it believed it had been invited inside. Outside, the village remained unnaturally quiet. Even the dogs refused to wander from beneath the houses where they hid. Every animal seemed to know something the people did not. Just before sunrise, Samuel stepped onto the veranda. The first light of morning spread slowly across the valley. He looked toward the eastern ridge. They've gone. Daniel joined him. Who? The ones watching. You saw them. Samuel nodded. I saw enough. Daniel looked across the mist-covered hills. I didn't see anyone. You weren't meant to. After breakfast, word spread quickly through the village. Miss Ivy's chickens had disappeared. Not a feather remained. Mr. Sinclair's goat had broken through its pen and fled into the bush. Pastor Henry discovered strange marks burned into the wooden cross outside the church. Nobody admitted being afraid, but everyone began checking their windows before sunset. Twice. By afternoon, Sister Agnes gathered several elders beneath the old breadfruit tree beside the chapel. Daniel listened from a distance. We cannot wait. Brother Elijah agreed. If she's gathering others, we find her before nightfall. An elderly farmer slowly shook his head. You don't hunt an Old Higue. You survive one. Samuel unfolded the worn map once more. His finger stopped on a place marked only by a faded circle. There. Every face around the table changed. No. One woman whispered. Not Black Hollow. Daniel had never heard the name before. What is Black Hollow? Nobody answered him. Finally, Miss Euphemia spoke. It's where the forgotten things wait. That evening, despite every warning, Daniel followed them. The lantern keepers. Miss Euphemia. His grandfather. Brother Elijah. Samuel. Together they climbed a narrow trail that disappeared into dense forest. The deeper they walked, the older the woods became. Massive tree ferns blocked the fading light. Twisted vines hung from towering cedar trees. The air smelled of damp earth and wild ginger. No birds sang here. No insects buzzed. Only the sound of footsteps. After nearly an hour, the trail ended. Before them lay a clearing unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. The earth was black. Not dark brown. Not muddy. Black. As though fire had once burned so hot that even the soil remembered. At the center stood the ruins of an old stone house. Its roof had long since collapsed. Tree roots pushed through cracked walls. The doorway remained standing. Empty. Watching. Brother Elijah stopped walking. No farther. Samuel crouched beside the doorway. Fresh footprints. Bare feet. Dozens of them. All leading inside. None. Leading out. Daniel's mouth went dry. How is that possible? Samuel stood slowly. It isn't. A faint laugh drifted from inside the ruins. Then another. Then another. Women's voices. Children's laughter. An old man humming a church hymn. The sounds blended together until they became impossible to separate. Daniel recognized one voice immediately. His mother. Another. Belonged to his late grandmother. He hadn't heard it since her funeral. Tears stung his eyes. The doorway seemed to pull at him. Just one step closer. Just one look inside. He raised one foot. A firm hand grabbed his shoulder. Miss Euphemia. Without looking at him, she whispered, "They're not calling you. They're calling your memories." The laughter stopped. Silence rolled across the clearing. Then a single woman stepped into the doorway. It was Miss Celia. The yellow dress looked untouched. Her smile was warm, almost welcoming. She looked directly at Sister Agnes. "So, you finally came." Sister Agnes didn't answer. Miss Celia's smile slowly faded. Her voice changed. Deeper. Older. Carrying an exhaustion that sounded centuries old. "I've been alone for such a very long time." Brother Elijah planted his mahogany staff firmly into the black earth. "You've never been alone. You chose this." Miss Celia laughed. A laugh filled with sorrow instead of joy. "No, you still don't understand." She slowly lifted one hand. From the shadows behind her, figures began to emerge. 1, then 2, then 5, then 10. Men. Women. Young. Old. Each dressed in clothes from different generations. Each smiling the same empty smile. Each standing perfectly still. Daniel felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Because as the last figure stepped into the fading light, he recognized the face. It was one of the 7 people whose marker stood beneath the silk cotton tree. A person the village believed had disappeared more than 40 years ago. And then, every one of them opened their eyes at exactly the same moment. Chapter 9. The Ones Who Never Left. Fear does curious things to the human heart. Sometimes. It tells you to run. Sometimes. It roots your feet to the earth until you cannot remember how running works. Daniel could not move. 10 figures stood in the doorway of the ruined house. Young. Old. Men. Women. Every face carried the same expression. Not anger. Not hatred. Only an unbearable emptiness. Like people who had forgotten what it meant to be alive, but had not yet learned how to be dead. The evening wind stirred their clothing. Yet none of them blinked. None of them breathed. Miss Celia stepped aside. "Do you recognize them?" Daniel nodded slowly. "I've seen one of them." He pointed toward an elderly fisherman wearing faded khaki trousers. "His marker is beneath the silk cotton tree." Miss Euphemia lowered her head. "Isaiah Bennett." She whispered the name as though speaking it aloud might wake something. "He disappeared when I was 16. Another figure stepped forward. A young woman carrying a woven market basket. Daniel noticed wildflowers still resting inside it. Fresh. Bright. As though they had been picked only moments before. Miss Euphemia's voice cracked. Joyce Campbell. She vanished walking home from market. One by one. The names returned. People Harmony Gap had mourned. People whose funerals had never happened. People whose families had spent years waiting for footsteps that never came. Miss Celia watched them quietly. You buried empty coffins. You cried over empty graves. You told your children to stop asking questions. Her smile faded. But they were never gone. The figures behind her slowly turned toward the villagers. Not with violence. With longing. As though they desperately wished to remember the people they had once been. Brother Elijah planted the end of his mahogany staff against the black earth. You've kept them long enough. Miss Celia's face hardened. I kept nothing. They stayed. Samuel spoke for the first time since entering the clearing. No. They were trapped. Miss Celia looked directly at him. You know what loneliness becomes after 100 years? No one answered. It becomes hunger. The sky darkened. Clouds rolled across the moon. The ruined house seemed to grow taller. Older. The air became heavy with the scent of damp earth and crushed pimento leaves. Daniel suddenly heard whispers. Not from the figures. From the ground itself. Hundreds of quiet voices speaking all at once. He could not understand the words. Only the sadness inside them. Sister Agnes stepped forward carrying her lantern. She held it high. Its warm golden light spread across the clearing. One by one. The silent figures looked toward the flame. For the first time, emotion crossed their faces. Not fear. Recognition. One elderly woman began to cry. A young boy lowered his head. The fisherman closed his eyes. They remembered. Only for a heartbeat. But it was enough. Miss Celia saw it too. Her smile disappeared. No. Her voice echoed through the forest. Don't look at the light. The figures trembled. Their empty smiles faded. Some reached toward the lantern. Others clutched their heads as though fighting invisible chains. Then the forest answered. Branches cracked. Leaves rustled. Something enormous moved beyond the tree line. Not walking. Circling. Watching. Brother Elijah slowly turned. Samuel's eyes narrowed. Miss Euphemia whispered a prayer. Even Miss Celia looked afraid. Daniel followed everyone's gaze toward the darkness between the trees. Two enormous crimson eyes opened. Far too high above the ground. Far too wide apart to belong to any ordinary animal. The earth trembled beneath a slow, heavy footstep. Another followed. Then came the unmistakable sound of iron dragging across stone. Clang. 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 Brother Elijah's face lost all color. He spoke only 3 words. Rolling calf. The chains drew closer. Not toward the villagers. Not toward the lantern keepers. Toward Miss Celia. And for the very first time, the Old Higue took a step backward. Chapter 10. The chains that remember. There are stories every Jamaican child hears. Some are told with laughter. Some are told with a warning. But there is one story that almost every elder lowers their voice to tell. Never stand in the middle of a lonely road after midnight. If you hear chains, do not wait to see what is pulling them. Leave. Because not every creature hunting in the darkness is hunting you. The chain scraped across the black earth. Clang. 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 Each sound echoed through black hollow like a hammer striking old iron. The crimson eyes drifted between the trees. They were too high. Far too high. Daniel realized whatever approached stood taller than any horse. Taller than any man. The trees themselves seemed to lean away from it. Then, it stepped into the moonlight. Its body resembled an enormous black bull, its hide darker than a moonless sea. Its muscles rippled beneath skin that looked almost like polished stone. Its horns curved toward the heavens, scarred with age. Around its neck hung thick rusted chains. They dragged behind it, carving deep grooves into the earth. Smoke curled from its nostrils. Its eyes burned like 2 pieces of living coal. The rolling calf had arrived. No one moved. Not even Miss Celia. The creature stopped only a few yards from the ruined house. It lowered its massive head. Not toward the villagers. Toward her. The Old Higue's confident smile was gone. For the first time since Daniel had met her. She looked frightened. You found me. The rolling calf answered with a slow breath that sounded like thunder trapped inside a cave. Its chains rattled once. The sound alone made Daniel's knees weaken. Brother Elijah whispered. It remembers. Daniel looked at him. What does it remember? The promise. What promise? Miss Euphemia answered without taking her eyes off the creature. Every curse creates another. And sometimes, The curses are sent to collect each other. Miss Celia laughed. It was a brittle laugh. The kind people make when courage has already begun slipping away. I've done nothing for decades. The rolling calf took one slow step. Clang. I stayed hidden. Another step. Clang. I harmed no one. One more. Clang. Samuel finally spoke. You lied. Silence fell. The old Higue turned toward him. I fed. You hunted. I survived. You stole. Her shoulders slumped. For a heartbeat, she looked less like a monster, and more like someone carrying the unbearable weight of centuries. Daniel found himself asking the question no one else dared. Why? Miss Celia looked at him. Not with anger. With exhaustion. Because I was afraid to die. The words drifted across the clearing like falling ash. I was young once. I had children. A husband. A little house. I begged for one more year. Then another. And another. She looked down at her trembling hands. One day, I forgot how many years I had stolen. Sister Agnes lowered her lantern. So all this time, you've been running. Miss Celia nodded. I thought if I kept moving, it would never find me. The rolling calf snorted. The ground shook. Brother Elijah whispered. It always finds you. The creature suddenly stopped. Its burning eyes shifted away from Miss Celia. Slowly, they settled on Daniel. The boy's heart froze. The massive head tilted. Almost curiously. Daniel expected it to charge. Instead, the beast took one step sideways, as though deliberately placing itself between Daniel and the ruined house. Samuel's eyes widened. It isn't here to hunt him. Miss Euphemia nodded. No, it's guarding him. A cold wind swept through Black Hollow. The figures standing behind Miss Celia began whispering again. Only now, their voices were different. No longer empty. They were pleading. Some called for mothers. Others prayed. One quietly sang an old revival hymn. Their memories were returning. The old Higue looked back at them, horror spreading across her face. No. If they remember, they'll leave. Tears welled in her eyes. And then, I'll truly be alone. No one spoke. Even the rolling calf stood silent. Because in that single heartbreaking moment, everyone understood the cruelest part of the curse. For a century, she had stolen lives to escape loneliness. And every life she stole had only made her loneliness deeper. Then the chain stopped rattling. The rolling calf lifted its head toward the stars. It released a roar so powerful that the hills answered in echoes. Far beyond Black Hollow, across the valleys of St. Mary, another voice answered. Not a roar, not a cry. A woman's song. Ancient. Beautiful. And impossibly sad. Miss Euphemia's eyes filled with tears. No, she whispered. River Mama has awakened. The forest, already holding its breath, seemed to fall into an even deeper silence. The night had revealed that Jamaica's oldest legends were no longer separate stories. They were beginning to answer one another. Chapter 11. River Mama's Song. Not every ancient thing walks upon the land. Some wait beneath quiet rivers. Some sleep beneath waterfalls older than memory. The people of Harmony Gap had always treated the river with respect. Children were taught never to shout at its banks. Never throw stones into still water. Never boast about what they planned to take from it. If you drank from the river, you thanked it. If you crossed it, you greeted it. Because water remembers. The song drifted across the hills. Soft at first, barely more than a whisper carried by the wind. No words, only a melody. Ancient, melancholy, beautiful enough to stop every heartbeat in Black Hollow. The rolling calf lowered its great head. The trapped villagers became perfectly still. Even Miss Celia closed her eyes. "I know that song," she whispered. Her voice trembled. "I haven't heard it in centuries." The earth beneath Daniel's feet shivered. Not with fear, with recognition. Somewhere beyond the forest, the river had begun to glow. Not brightly, just enough to paint the leaves with silver light. The glow spread upstream, winding through the valley like liquid moonlight. Samuel watched silently. "It has chosen to come." Brother Elijah frowned. "River Mama never leaves her waters." Samuel answered without looking away. "Then something has happened that has never happened before." Without warning, the figures standing behind Miss Celia turned toward the river. One by one, as though hearing someone call them home. The elderly fisherman smiled for the first time. The young market woman clutched her basket to her chest. A little boy no older than 8 whispered, "Me here, Mama." His voice cracked with hope. Then he took a step. Miss Celia reached out desperately. "No." The child kept walking. Another followed. Then another. The invisible chains binding them had begun to loosen. Miss Celia fell to her knees. "You can't leave me." No one answered. She looked less like a monster now, more like a woman watching everyone she had ever known walk away. Daniel felt something he never expected. Pity. Miss Euphemia noticed. "Careful, child." He looked at her. "You feel sorry for her." Daniel nodded. "Does that make me foolish?" The old woman sighed. "No, it makes you human." She rested a gentle hand on his shoulder. "But never let pity blind you to truth." The song grew louder. Its melody floated through every tree, every stone, every breath of wind. Then, the river itself rose. Not in anger. Not in a flood. The water lifted gracefully into the air, twisting like ribbons of glass beneath the moon. From its heart emerged a woman. Her skin shimmered like flowing water. Her long dark hair drifted around her without wind. Tiny drops of water circled her like stars around the moon. She wore no crown. She needed none. The river crowned her with its own light. No one spoke. No one dared. River Mama had come. She looked first at the trapped souls, then at the rolling calf. The great beast bowed its head, not in fear, in respect. Finally, her gaze rested upon Miss Celia. The Old Higue lowered her eyes. "I never wanted this." River Mama's voice sounded like rain falling upon leaves. "I know. I only wanted more time. I know. I was afraid. I know." Miss Celia looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Can I still be forgiven?" The river fell silent. The answer did not come immediately, because forgiveness was not something even an ancient spirit could simply give away. It had to be earned. River Mama slowly raised one hand. The water surrounding her began to swirl. The trapped villagers stepped closer, drawn toward the silver current. Their faces grew brighter. Their empty eyes filled with life. They remembered their names, their families, their homes. One by one, they smiled. Not the hollow smile of a curse, but the peaceful smile of people finally finding their way home. Daniel watched as the little boy disappeared into the light. Then the fisherman. Then the market woman with the basket of flowers. Each dissolved into shimmering droplets that drifted gently back into the river. Miss Celia stood alone. Truly alone. She fell to the black earth and wept. Not the tears of a monster. The tears of a woman who finally understood the price of outrunning death. River Mama stepped closer. Her voice was quiet enough that only those nearest could hear. The hardest prison is the one we build from our own fear. The silver light brightened around them. But just as peace seemed ready to settle over Black Hollow, the water around River Mama rippled violently. She turned toward the mountains. Her expression changed. For the first time, concern crossed her face. There is another. Brother Elijah's grip tightened on his staff. Another Old Higue? River Mama slowly shook her head. No. Her eyes searched the darkness beyond the trees. Something far older. And somewhere deep within the Blue Mountains, a single pair of golden eyes opened. Chapter 12. The Keeper of the Mountain. The Blue Mountains have always worn their secrets well. Their peaks disappear into clouds without warning. Ancient footpaths begin where no map says they should. Mist gathers in valleys where no river flows. The Maroons used those mountains to win their freedom. Healers climbed them searching for roots and leaves that could mend broken bodies. But there were places even the bravest hunters refused to enter. Not because they feared getting lost, because they feared being found. River Mama's eyes remained fixed upon the distant ridge. The silver light around her began to fade. The mountain has awakened. Samuel frowned. I thought it was only a story. River Mama looked at him. Every story begins because someone survived long enough to tell it. Brother Elijah slowly lowered his staff. Who lives there? For the first time that night, River Mama hesitated. The first keeper. Daniel frowned. What is a keeper? Before anyone answered, Miss Euphemia spoke. When the island was young, when people still listened to rivers, and trees still answered prayers, there were guardians. They didn't rule. They didn't command. They simply kept the balance. Daniel looked toward the mountains. What happened to them? The people stopped believing. The wind shifted. A scent drifted through Black Hollow. Wild coffee blossoms. Wet stone. Fresh rain. The same scent Daniel remembered from climbing into the mountains with his grandfather years before. The forest changed. Leaves that had hung motionless all night suddenly rustled. Fireflies appeared one by one, floating between the trees like tiny lanterns. Even the rolling calf lifted its head, listening, waiting. Then, a single footstep echoed across the clearing. Not loud, not heavy, yet every living thing heard it. Another followed. A figure emerged from the mist. He wore no fine clothing, only a simple linen shirt, faded trousers, and a walking staff cut from polished guango wood. His beard was streaked with gray. His skin carried the warm brown of countless Jamaican mornings beneath the sun. He looked like an ordinary old man. Until Daniel met his eyes. They were golden. Not bright. Not glowing. Simply golden. As though sunrise itself had settled inside them. The stranger stopped beside River Mama. She inclined her head. The rolling calf lowered itself onto one knee. Even the wind seemed to pause. Daniel whispered, "Who is he?" The old man smiled. "I've had many names. The Taino called me one thing. The Maroons another. The fishermen had their own." He looked toward Daniel. "But names aren't important. Deities are." Miss Celia stared at him in disbelief. "You still live," the old man answered gently. "As long as Jamaica remembers herself." "So do I." She lowered her eyes. "I thought everyone had forgotten." "Many have." He looked across the hills. But not enough. He walked to the center of Black Hollow. The black earth beneath his feet slowly changed. Dark soil gave way to rich brown. Tiny green shoots pushed through the ground. Wildflowers bloomed where only ash had been moments before. Daniel watched in amazement. "How are you doing that?" The old man chuckled. I'm not. The island is. Then his smile disappeared. He turned toward the mountains once more. The thing that woke. It isn't part of Jamaica. A cold silence settled over the clearing. River Mama closed her eyes. I feared as much. Brother Elijah tightened his grip on the staff. What is it? The old man looked toward the distant peaks where clouds had begun swirling in unnatural circles. His voice became almost a whisper. It came here long ago. It hid. It waited. And now, it believes the island has forgotten its protectors. Daniel felt a chill despite the warm Caribbean night. Can we stop it? The old man looked at the boy for a long moment. Then he smiled. Perhaps, but not with strength. Not with anger. He rested one hand on Daniel's shoulder. The island has chosen its witness. Witness, you've seen the truth. You showed compassion where others showed fear. You listened before judging. He looked toward Miss Celia, who still knelt quietly on the earth. That is rarer than courage. High above them, thunder rolled across the blue mountains. Not from a storm. From something stirring deep within the ancient peaks. The golden-eyed keeper slowly lifted his staff. Its weathered wood began to glow with a warm amber light. He drew a single circle in the air. The glow spread across the clearing like the first rays of dawn. Then he spoke words older than the oldest village on the island. The time of hiding is over. Chapter 13. The morning after. There is a peculiar kind of silence that follows a night no one can explain. It arrives just before dawn. Not empty. Not peaceful. Heavy. As though the island itself is catching its breath. The first rooster crowed from somewhere beyond the hills. Another answered. Then another. One by one, familiar sounds returned to Harmony Gap. A donkey brayed from a nearby pasture. A woman lit her coal stove. The smell of roasting coffee drifted across the valley. Morning had arrived. Yet no one believed the danger had truly passed. Black Hollow looked different in daylight. The black earth had faded to rich brown. Wildflowers covered the clearing where only hours before sorrow had taken root. The ruined stone house remained. But it seemed smaller now. Older. Like an abandoned memory finally allowed to rest. Daniel searched for the figures who had stood beside Miss Celia. They were gone. Not a footprint remained. Only a handful of yellow blossoms lay where they had disappeared. Miss Euphemia smiled softly. They've gone home. Miss Celia still sat beneath the silk cotton tree. The yellow dress that had once seemed so bright now looked faded by time. She stared quietly at her empty hands. No one approached her. Not because they hated her. Because no one knew what to say to a woman who had carried a curse for longer than anyone could imagine. Daniel walked toward her. His grandfather watched, but did not stop him. You shouldn't come close, Miss Celia said without looking up. I'm not afraid. She gave a sad smile. You should be. Daniel sat on one of the great roots of the tree. For a while, neither of them spoke. Finally, she asked, Do you know what I miss the most? Daniel shook his head. She looked toward the rising sun. The ordinary things. The smell of fresh rain. The taste of roasted yam. The sound of children laughing without fearing me. A tear rolled slowly down her cheek. I can't even remember my husband's face anymore. The words struck Daniel harder than any frightening story ever had. For the first time, he understood the true cost of becoming a monster. Not claws. Not wings. Not darkness. Loss. The keeper approached quietly. His golden eyes reflected the morning light. The curse weakens. Miss Celia nodded. I know. Are you ready? She closed her eyes. I think. For the first time. I am. The keeper placed his weathered hand gently upon her shoulder. Then let the island remember who you were. The wind began to move through the branches of the silk cotton tree. Leaves whispered overhead. River Mama appeared beside the riverbank, her form already fading into mist. The rolling calf stood upon the distant ridge, watching, waiting, not as an executioner, as a witness. The keeper raised his staff. No brilliant light burst from the sky. No thunder shook the earth. Instead, the morning breeze carried the scent of jasmine. Miss Celia smiled. A genuine smile. One untouched by hunger. Untouched by fear. She whispered a single name. Samuel. No one knew whether she spoke of a husband, a son, or someone lost to time. Then she closed her eyes. Her body became thousands of tiny golden threads that rose into the warm Caribbean air. The breeze carried them through the branches of the silk cotton tree, across the hills, toward the rising sun. And she was gone. Harmony Gap slowly returned to itself. Children laughed again. The dogs barked at passing goats as though making up for lost nights. Windows remained open after sunset. People greeted one another with easier smiles. Life continued, as life always does. But something had changed. Not only in the village. In Daniel. Weeks later, Daniel climbed the hill one final time. The silk cotton tree still stood proudly against the Jamaican sky. Ancient. Patient. Its roots reached deep into the island that had watched generations come and go. Daniel rested one hand upon its rough bark. Thank you. The leaves stirred gently. Perhaps because of the wind. Perhaps for another reason. No one can say. Years later, when Daniel had become an old man with grandchildren gathered around his veranda, they would ask him the same question every child eventually asked. Grandpa, are Old Higue real? He would smile into the evening light before answering. They were. Then he would lean forward just a little. But don't remember the story because it frightens you. Remember it because every monster was once a person who chose fear instead of hope. And every act of kindness is a thread that keeps the darkness from returning. The children would laugh. The crickets would begin their nightly chorus. And somewhere high above the blue mountains, a doctor bird would dart through the morning light. The island would keep its secrets, just as it always had. End. Epilogue. Some stories refuse to end. There is something every Jamaican child eventually learns. The island listens. It listens to footsteps crossing lonely footpaths. It listens to whispered prayers carried on the evening breeze. It listens to the stories told beneath zinc roofs while rain drums overhead. And if those stories are told with honesty, the island remembers. 35 years passed. Harmony Gap grew. Electric lights replaced many of the old kerosene lamps. Concrete houses appeared where little wooden cottages once stood. Mobile phones reached the hills. The old district shop accepted card payments. Children who once climbed mango trees now stared into glowing screens. The world had changed. But the silk cotton tree still stood. Older. Wider. Patient as ever. No one cut it down. No one dared. Not because they feared a curse. Because they had learned respect. Daniel Brown became the village schoolteacher. Every September, another group of bright young faces filled his classroom. Every year, one curious child eventually asked, "Sir, is it true there's a haunted tree up the hill?" Daniel never answered immediately. Instead, he smiled. "What do you think?" The children argued. Some believed. Some laughed. Some rolled their eyes exactly as Daniel once had. He never corrected them. Some lessons could not be taught inside a classroom. One evening, long after retirement, Daniel sat alone on his veranda. The sunset painted the western sky in deep oranges and soft purples. A warm breeze carried the scent of pimento wood and rain. His granddaughter, Maya, climbed into the chair beside him. Grandpa? Did you ever really meet River Mama? Daniel chuckled. If I told you yes, you'd tell everybody at school. I wouldn't. You absolutely would. She laughed. So, he looked toward the distant blue mountains. There are some questions that deserve wonder more than answers. Just then, every dog in the valley began barking. Not frantically. Not with fear. Simply announcing that someone had entered the district. Daniel listened. The barking moved steadily along the road before fading again. He smiled. See? What? The dogs are doing their job. Maya frowned. I don't understand. You will. The old man slowly stood. His knees complained, but the rest of him felt strangely light. He looked toward the silk cotton tree one last time. Its branches swayed gently beneath the evening sky. For the briefest moment, he thought he saw tiny golden threads dancing among the leaves. Not trapped. Not wandering. Free. He smiled. Good evening, Miss Celia. The breeze answered by rustling through the great tree. Nothing more. Nothing less. Exactly as it should. Years later, after Daniel himself had become another beloved ancestor whose stories were still told around kitchen tables and front verandas, Harmony Gap remained a place where children learned two simple truths. Be kind. Respect what came before you. Because the greatest protection against darkness is not salt. It is not lanterns. It is not ancient magic. It is the quiet courage to choose compassion when fear offers an easier path. And if one evening you find yourself walking a lonely Jamaican road as the sun slips behind the hills, listen. If the crickets are singing, keep walking. If the doctor bird flashes through the trees, smile. But if every sound suddenly disappears, if the wind holds its breath, if the night becomes so still that you can hear your own heartbeat, go home. Not every story is looking for another ending. Some are simply making sure they are never forgotten. The end.